This government overreach in the regulatory process has to stop.
And we are joined by Representative Brad Finstad of Minnesota. Congressman, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We've got Mark Schirmer of Landline Magazine here as well. Mark, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Scott.
And Congressman, congrats first of all on passage of the Prove It Act. Must feel good.
Yeah, it is. It is encouraging to know that hope is on the horizon. That some sanity in our government and some certainty for our small businesses across this country. Have desperately needed things like this. So I'm excited to see some momentum building here.
Yeah, and I know we certainly want to talk about that momentum as we enter 2025 and kind of talk about what that looks like. But with regard to the Prove It Act in particular, to begin with here, we spoke with you, I think, earlier this year when you first introduced the bill. Now it's passed the House. For those listening who may not be familiar, can you talk a little bit about what your bill aims to do?
Yeah. So for the listeners here today that maybe don't know who I am, I'm a farmer from South Central Minnesota. I'm one of the few members of Congress that has a CDL. I haul my grain to market. I have kind of lived kind of the American dream, fourth generation farm, and have seen firsthand just the complexity and, quite frankly, the insanity of government regulation, and how a lot of times we like to point our fingers at the lawmakers and say, you just need to create a different law, or you need to pass a law to fix this. And what we see over and over and over again, it's really where the rubber hits the road for small businesses across this country is really the regulations and the enforcement and the paperwork and the hoops and loops that our government bureaucracy puts on us. And so the Prove It Act is really just saying, listen, when we pass laws in Congress and the executive branch takes over the regulatory rulemaking and then the enforcement of those rules, that they have to take into account that if there will be a cost to small businesses, if there'll be a cost to the people of our country, maybe unintended or intended, and they need to then, report those costs, report those findings, and give businesses an opportunity to dispute those costs and findings, and get Congress more engaged in the rulemaking process and really what it means. In the Biden administration alone, we've seen over $1.8 trillion of costs just in the regulatory compliance area, and over 340 million hours of paperwork that it's cost our small businesses just to comply with some of these insane hoops and loops that our government puts on it. So the Prove It Act to me is just kind of a common sense farmer approach. Like, you know what, if you're going to pass a law and the bureaucrats are going to make that law have so many hoops and loops and turns and twists, and it's going to create, a small business like my farm to engage a lawyer to even figure out how we do it, maybe it's not the best way to go about rulemaking and lawmaking in our country. So we need to put the power back to our people, the power back to small businesses to do what they do best. Obviously, we're going to be in compliance, and we're going to do the best that we can to live up to the responsibilities that we have. But this government overreach in the regulatory process has to stop. And that Prove It Act makes it very clear that the bureaucrats need to be on notice that we're paying attention.
Hi, Congressman. This is Mark Schirmer from Landline Magazine. And as we talked about, the Prove It Act has passed the House. Obviously, it'd be difficult for it to get all the way through the Senate and signed by President Biden before the end of this legislative session. But what does this show that the House was able to pass this? What does this mean for when this bill would obviously be likely reintroduced in the next session and have the chances of actually being signed into law by President Trump?
Yeah, so it's very encouraging. I mean, there's momentum that has been built by us passing this in the House. And by the way, it was a bipartisan vote. We had a couple Democrats come on board. And I think that's a good sign that, government efficiencies is not just a Republican interest, that there is some Democrats interested in making our government more reflective of we the people. And so this is, really kind of the first step of creating some momentum. This speaks very well with the Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy's Doge efforts to make government more efficient. And I think what we see then is that momentum carrying over into the 119th, and having conversations with the Senate now, knowing that they have seen that we can pass it in the House. They will stand up and pay attention. I think we have a good opportunity to move quickly on it in the 119th Congress.
And as we look ahead to 2025 and beyond, as you kind of allude to there, the political climate obviously is going to change here. Some of the regulations that are already in place, truck drivers in particular, all these EPA emission standards that have come out and really drawn the ire of the trucking industry. Are those a type of things that we might see, I guess, stopped from actually going into effect in the future based on the Prove It Act? What other kinds of regulations do you kind of, see that are out there that may be a good example, I guess, for the Prove It Act to kind of strike down?
Yeah, I mean, I think the emission standards obviously are on the table. I think all of the unnecessary costs that were put onto all of our small businesses, whether it's the government juice we have to add to our tractors, that the whole deaf and what it's done to my John Deere tractors, and quite frankly the cost of operating my farm, to all of the different crazy standards that really are sold to us as like, we're saving the planet, this is changing the world, where you actually don't even see the dial being moved in regards to some of the so-called intended purposes of some of these regulations. And so, I mean, I would just tell your audience, like, everything's on the table. Bring your ideas to your members of Congress. We have an opportunity, a generational opportunity, to really kind of reset the deck in regards to common sense within our government. And so, I mean, obviously, none of us want to leave our backyard worse than we found it. We always want to push ourselves to do better, to be better stewards of the land, better stewards of our equipment and our economy and our businesses. But it has to be done in a way that makes sense and that is fiscally feasible, because what we're seeing is, a lot of small businesses that are being pushed out of business because of the regulatory climate. They can't afford the regulations. They can't afford the time it takes for all of the paperwork to be compliant. And quite frankly, what happens then is those costs then are put onto the consumer. So every time we put more regulations on the trucking industry, for instance, I try to tell people in the simplest forms that, if it costs $100 more because of the regulatory climate to haul a truckload of chicken nuggets to McDonald's, well, that $100 is going to be pushed onto the consumer. And before you know it, it's going to be $10 for a 6-piece chicken McNugget meal, because of all of the unnecessary costs that have been inflicted into that whole supply chain. And so we as government need to take into account that, this might feel good, this might sound good, but there is the economic reality. And that economic reality is really strangling the average everyday American right now. And, the election, if anything, spoke loud and clear. The people spoke loud and clear that the economy is not working for everybody. And we have to take a look at any and everywhere that we can within our government to see where are we actually making it harder for our citizens to flourish. And the regulatory front seems to be like low-hanging fruit. Heard it from a lot of your listeners. I've heard it from the farm community, and I've heard it from people all over southern Minnesota and all over the country. So I would say now is the time for your industry, for our industry to engage. If you have an idea that just or an issue that just doesn't make sense, a regulation that doesn't make sense, you don't understand why we're doing what we're doing, or quite frankly, bring examples of this is the reality of what this harebrained idea is costing us. Bring it to your member of Congress, because we have an opportunity right now to really kind of interject common sense into our government.
Speaking of a rollback of regulations, the current administration had made a push to mandate speed limiters on commercial motor vehicles. The Drive Act would actually stop FMCSA from doing that. I know that is a bill that you signed on as a co-sponsor of. And I think in your quotes kind of mentioned about being a farmer and driving a semi as you did here as well. Maybe talk a little bit about why you decided to be a co-sponsor of that and why that's maybe another example of a regulation that isn't kind of fitting the bill for small businesses, specifically truck drivers?
I just try to run everything that comes across my desk through the farmer common sense test. And I mean, I've been on the road and I've driven miles and miles and miles. And the last thing I want is the big nanny state government inside my cab telling me that you're gonna have to the truck is only going to go 55, and quite frankly, that becomes a safety issue in a lot of different cases. And if you're going to tell me that a government bureaucrat with some sort of regulation is going to dictate the terms upon which my safety in regards to the ability to act quickly, nimbly, flexible, there's not a one size fits all approach. And this is an example where it maybe sounds good on paper, and it might make someone feel good, like, well, yeah, there we go, no more 18 wheelers going over 55 miles an hour. Well, I tell you what, we're going to see some challenges, and we're going to see some big time public safety risks if we don't have the ability to maneuver and to handle our equipment in a way that is safe. And again, it's if you look at this with the assumption that everyone is speeding recklessly and out of control, then you have lost faith and trust in our friends, neighbors, and fellow Americans. And it's time for us to stop and to actually just trust that we as a country have done amazing things without the heavy hand of government having to lead us by the nose through every step of our life. And I trust the industry to do what's right. And quite frankly, to me, it's a public safety issue and a common sense issue. So it's one of those things that, again, some bureaucrat got worked up and said, you know what, this is going to keep everybody safe, and this will save the world. And the reality is it's the opposite of that.
Just one quick follow up to that. Obviously, with the new administration coming in, we don't expect, the speed limiter proposal to try to move forward. But with the Drive Act, do you think that there's still momentum for this to pass, just so that in the future, later on, this would be something that FMCSA wouldn't be able to take up again? Do you think there's still a chance that this might be a bill with still some momentum in the next session?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a little bit of strategy of how we play offense and defense on these things, knowing that we've been given a generational opportunity to lead on some of these issues. That window does close, whether we like it or not. I mean, every 2 years we as a country get to decide who represents us, and we see trends and political majorities shift. And so there's a certain amount of things that we're going to have to do to, obviously kill stupid ideas, but then also make sure that we kind of put those stupid ideas to rest. And so it's kind of assessing the strategy of how do we interject some of that long-term common sense into our government that can withstand the test of time versus, constantly yo-yo, yin-yang, back and forth based on the political whims and the political insanity that can sometimes be created by quite frankly, the lack of common sense and just all emotional reaction decisions. So it's kind of an assessment that we're starting to walk through.
One area in which our listeners would like to see Congress do something is with regard to truck parking. The Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act has been introduced a number of times. It seems to be gaining traction every time it's reintroduced, and I'm pretty certain it's going to be reintroduced next year by Congressman Mike Bost of Illinois. With the truck parking issue in particular, you're a co-sponsor of that bill as well. What are those conversations like with your colleagues? Do you see momentum on that issue as well? Can we feel somewhat confident that we're going to see something happen maybe next year or the year after that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely going to be some wind at our back on this issue. I think there's momentum. And again, to me, it comes down to access, supply chain, moving of goods from A to B, and creating a more efficient way for that to happen. Obviously, there's economic impacts, but there's obviously safety impacts. And so I would say if there's some things to your listeners that scream of common sense, you're probably going to see some movement of that right now in the short term, because we feel like the voters of our country kind of told us that's what they want to see and that's what they expect. I had a conversation earlier today with some folks, and I just said, at the end of the day, there's a certain amount of responsibility that we have to kind of uphold the promises made, promises kept. And when you run for office, you make promises, you make declarations, you say that there's certain things that you wanna work on, and we have 2 years to fulfill those promises and to enact some of those things that we said we heard loud and clear from our constituents that they want done, and now it's our time to do it. So this is an area that I feel like again seems to be low hanging fruit where we should be able to create some momentum and push this sooner rather than later, earlier in the 119th Congress.
Excellent. Mark, do you have anything else?
No, I think I'm good for now. Thank you.
Congressman, before we let you go, we know your time is valuable. Any final message, anything you'd like to say to our truck driving friends out there?
Yeah, first and foremost, thank you so much. Appreciate you. I am honored that you have chosen this profession, and it is an honorable, noble profession. If people like to eat, if people like to do their shopping on Amazon and get their Christmas gifts, they better be thanking a truck driver right now, because everything in this economy moves through all of you, and you are the glue that keeps this country going. And we need to continue to work with you and for you to make sure that you have a bright future, that we are doing things to bring more people into your profession, and that we honor and respect the work that you do. So big old thank you for what you do.